Chapter 6, The Underground Road. Harriet was back on the Broadus plantation, back in the slave quarter. Miss Susan brought her back and told the master that Minta wasn't worth a sixpence. Old Rich sniffed her contempt for Miss Susan when she saw Minta. The child was little better than skin and bones. She was as filthy as though she'd been living in a hog wallow, and her neck and back were covered with scars, old scars crisscrossed with fresh ones from the beating Miss Susan and her husband had given her because she ran away. It was slow work, but old Rit got the fresh scars healed up, and then when Harriet began to get a little flesh on her bones, Brodas hired her out again. In a way, Harriet had won a victory. Though Rit did not think so, Harriet worked in the fields from then on. Brodas hired her out to a man who kept her out of doors. She loaded wooden wagons, split rails, and knew more about mules and hoes and plows than she did about the interior of a house. Despite her strong, sturdy body, she was still a child. Yet she was often ordered to perform jobs that would tax the strength of a full-grown, able-bodied man. If she failed in any of these back-breaking jobs, she was beaten. Her appearance began to change. The solemn-eyed, shy little girl, hesitant of speech, had disappeared. She was replaced by a sullen-eyed creature, the lids hanging heavily over her eyes. She had the calloused, worked-hardened hands of a field slave. She no longer wore the tuto linen shirt, the one garment worn by children. She wore a long one-piece dress tied around the middle with a piece of rope. She looped the skirts up when she was in the field. She was still barefooted. She worked from dawn till dusk, work in the rain and the heat of the sun. Her muscles hardened. She sang when she was in the fields or working in the nearby woods. Her voice was unusual because of the faint huskiness. Once having heard it, people remembered it. The low notes were rich and deep. The high notes were sweet and true. Like the other slaves, she made up the words and the melody of most of the songs that she sang, never singing them exactly the same way. In 1831, Harriet started wearing a bandana. It was made from a piece of brilliantly colored cotton cloth. She wound it around her head, deftly smooth, and then tied it in place, pulling the knots tight and hard. This new headgear was an indication that she was no longer regarded as a child. These colorful bandanas were worn by young women. They were a symbol of maturity. Though the life she led was cruelly hard, she was more nearly content than she had ever been before. She was working outdoors. She felt free in the field. No matter how hard the job assigned to her, she could always pause for a moment in her work and watch the slow drift of the clouds overhead, study the swift flight of birds. Even in summer, when heat wave rose from the land, there was a fresh smell from the woods close by. Sometimes this short, straight-backed young girl hummed under her breath or sang while she hoed the corn or tugged on the reins when a refractory mule refused to budge. True, work in the fields had calloused her hands, but it had given her a strong, erect body. She carried her head proudly as she sang. That year, 1831, when Harriet regarded herself as sufficiently grown up to wear a bandana, she kept hearing a strange, fascinating story told and retold in the quarter in the fields. This same story about a slave named Tice David was being told in the big house too, but with a difference. The slave told it with relish and the masters with distaste. Tice Davids ran away from his master in Kentucky. He planned to cross the Ohio River at Ripley, but his master followed so close behind him that Tice had to jump in the river and swim across. The master hunted for a boat, and while hunting, never lost sight of Tice, kept watching his head just above the water as he swam toward the opposite shore. Once in the boat, the master followed him, saw him plainly swimming faster and faster. The master drew so near to him that when Tice stood up in the water and started to run, he could see the water splashing out of his pants. He saw him reach the store. The master grounded the boat, jumped out more than 5 minutes behind the slave. He never saw Tice Davids again. He combed the countryside. He searched the anti-slavery town of Ripley. He knew that the town had a reputation of being hostile to slaveholders, had heard vaguely of a Reverend John Rankin, who served as a watchdog and guardian for runaways. Even so, Tice Davids had disappeared right before his master's eyes. The master went back to Kentucky and told about his strange disappearance, how his slave, Tice, had literally vanished before his eyes. Puzzled, disturbed more than he cared to admit, he explained this mystery by saying he must have gone on an underground road. Harriet was puzzled by this story. She kept thinking about it. Was there a road that ran under the ground? Was that how Tice Davis had escaped from his master? If Tice could find it, could other people find it too? People in the border states who had been sheltering runaway slaves helped further the mystery of an underground road. The new steam trains were being talked about everywhere. A rumor started and spread to the effect that there was an underground railroad too. The free Negroes, the Quakers, and the Methodists, the German farmers who helped runaway slaves in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New York started using phrases and words suited to the idea of a railroad. They called themselves conductors, station masters, brakemen. Their houses and barns and haystacks and the unsuspected secret passage inside the big farmhouses were called depots and stations. They referred to the runaways as passengers, parcels, boxes, bales of black wool. Large parcels were grown-ups, small parcels were children. In 1831, there were many people like the young Harriet who believed that there really was a steam train that ran through a deep underground tunnel from south to north, and that a slave could board it in the south at some unknown point, would emerge a free man in a free state when the train came out of the ground, snorting and puffing, leaving a trail of smoke and ciders behind it. Certainly the story of Tice Davis suggested that this was true. This mysterious underground railroad was spoken of in whispers in the quarter on the Broadus plantation, just as it was on all other plantations. In that same year, in August, in October, in November, the slaves in the quarter and the masters in the big houses began to talk about another story. In the quarter, the name of the man who was involved was never spoken aloud. It was always whispered, as though the land, the trees, the skies, the rivers, and the covers had ears. For this was a horror story. Its details were known all over the United States. Like the other slaves, Harriet knew the story as accurately and as completely as though she had been an eyewitness to the event. It was the story of Nat Turner. He was a slave in Southampton, Virginia. He was called the prophet. He was a preacher. When he was a boy growing up, his mother told him over and over that he would be like Moses. He would lead his people out of slavery as Moses had led the children of Israel out of bondage in Egypt. She taught him verses and whole chapters of the Bible which she had memorized. He memorized them too, especially the ones that dealt with the prophets in the Old Testament. He was a silent, brooding man, given to fast and contemplation, going often alone into the caves of the mountains in the section of Virginia where he lived. He believed himself to be a prophet. He claimed that he saw visions. On the night of August 20, 1831, he said to 6 of his followers, "Our race is to be delivered from bondage, and God has appointed us as the men to do his bidding. I am told to slay all the whites we encounter, men, women, and children. It is necessary that the commencement of this revolution, all the whites we meet must die." They set out together, Nat Turner and his 6 followers, and at every plantation where they stopped, other slaves joined them, until there were 70 of them altogether. They killed 60 white persons, men, women, and children, found on plantations within a radius of 20 miles. The local militia and federal troops were called in to quell this unplanned and unrehearsed insurrection. All through the South, slaveholders were terrified. Though 100 Negroes were killed in the process of putting down this revolt, Nat Turner could not be found. He stayed hidden in a cage in Southampton County for 2 months. He was finally found and executed on November 11, 1831. On the Broadus plantation, the slaves whispered about the prophet too. Harriet, wearing her first bandana, working in the fields, thought about him, brooded about him. There was no question but they all wanted freedom, but at such a price. After November 11th, the whispering in the cabins went on endlessly. Night after night, while the fire died down in the fireplaces, every night in the quarter on the Broadus plantation, Harriet heard an old black woman, hunched over, clay piped in her mouth, mutter, "Eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burning for burning, wound for wound, stripe for stripe." The fire flared and set the shadows on the walls to trembling. After the Nat Turner insurrection, fear hung over the plantation from Virginia on down through Maryland, down to Louisiana, Alabama, and Mississippi. The slaveholders live in dread because the most faithful house slave might at any moment become another Nat, attacking the master in the dead of night with no warning. New laws were passed in slave states, and the old laws were more rigidly enforced. Nat Turner had been a silent, brooding slave. Get rid of the silent ones. He had been a preacher. He had talked about the children of Israel, about Moses. Therefore, there must be no more Sunday school for children who were slaves, no more separate church services for the slaves. They must not be permitted to congregate anywhere at any time, must not be allowed to talk freely to each other. Under no circumstances must they be permitted to learn to read and write. Make it a crime for anyone to teach them. Once again, the slaves were forbidden to sing Go Down Moses, the song with the sound of thunder in the chorus. Let my people go. Harriet thought the ghost of Nat Turner had joined the ghost of dead Mark Vesey. The carpenter and freeman, twin ghosts, now haunted the big house. The fields, the masters, the overseers, the slave traders, the slave drivers. She wondered if they hovered over the coffle of slaves being driven down on the road over land routes to Natchez or New Orleans, whispering taunts, crying revenge, revolt, bloody revolt. The Virginia Assembly met in December 1831. The subject of slavery was introduced because some of the counties, alarmed by the Nat Turner insurrection, had petitioned for the gradual emancipation of the slaves or for abolition of slavery. Two farmers whose land holdings were small when compared to the great area controlled by some of the Virginia shareholders were outspoken in their criticism of the institution of slavery. Philip Bowling, we talk of freedom while slavery exists in the land, and speak of horror or the tyranny of the Turk, but we foster an evil which is the best interest of community required shall be removed, and to which we trace the cause of depression of Eastern Virginia. Henry Berry, pass as severe laws as you will to keep these unfortunate creatures in ignorance. It is in vain unless you can extinguish the spark of intellect which God has given them. Can man be in the midst of freedom and not know what freedom is? A death struggle must come in, which one or the other class is extinguished forever.